Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today's session is Becoming Sex Positive, Insights into Sex Positive Therapy, presented by Dr. Sarah Dalton. Whenever you're ready, if you have slides or anything like that to pull up, if you guys have questions throughout, you can leave them in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Sarah Dalton, and I'm a faculty member here at the Chicago School. I primarily work now in the doctoral program, the Counselor Education and Supervision program. Let me show my slides, but I do feel strongly that slides are so boring. So if you have questions, please just jump in and ask me questions. I'm super happy to do that. Okay. Screen share, there you go. Slideshow. Okay, we can all see this. Can you see people's faces? Perfect. Let me move you. All right. All right, so here's my intro thing. So, okay, everyone's always like, how are you a sex therapist? What does that mean? How do I do it? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that looks like for me, what being a sex therapist kind of is, but also how you all can do sex positive work in your practice, because I think that's super important that we all can do it. I went to grad school and I did a lot of student life things, worked in admissions, disability services, I counseled, and I started to wonder how I could become a sex therapist. So I met with one in my town. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she was a retired sex therapist who had been a sex therapist since like Masters and Johnson time, which was amazing. I had just totally cold called her and she agreed to be my supervisor. And then I did that while also being in a doctoral program for counselor education and supervision. So currently I'm a professor here at the Chicago School. I do a lot of things with curriculum and work in the doc program. I have a virtual private practice, so I only see people online. I actually started that before COVID, so that was a helpful transition when COVID happened. I mostly work with queer clients, the queer community in Pennsylvania. So a lot of my clients are outside of Pittsburgh, where I live, but I did that because I wanted to be accessible to all sorts of clients. I grew up in very rural Pennsylvania where there were zero counselors at all, definitely no queer counselors. So I wanted to be open to seeing people all over the place. I do see a lot of queer clients specifically for sex therapy, no, though not all of them. So I see a lot of poly clients, basically people who are not cisgender, not hetero, a lot of trans clients, a lot of issues with initiating sex, maintaining healthy relationships, sexual pain, which is very common in women, especially after childbirth, and sex after illness. So I see a lot of clients who either have chronic pain issues or maybe are like post chemo cancer sort of things. And I also see supervision people in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, so the reason I'm so passionate about talking about this is because I don't have enough room in my schedule. And so I'd really like other people to be sex positive as well, so I could have some cool people to refer to. But a lot of times other counselors will say like, well, I'm not a sex therapist. You need to see a sex therapist to talk about this issue. And that is certainly not the case. All of us can use sex positive language and interventions that could help all of our clients. All those things. I wasn't even reading that, but that's what it says. Okay, here are some benefits of being a sex therapist. So let's say you go through the certification process, and I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about that. These are some benefits. So it's obviously a specialization. It's a certification where you could say, I am skilled, I have this certification, and not all therapists have it. So there is a benefit. Clients know that you're sex positive. They know that they can come and talk to you about sex-related concerns. You're going to have such a full caseload, so full. You have exposure to lots of different issues, types of clients. You never have a boring day. That's my favorite. But it does not allow you to bill at a higher rate for insurance purposes, obviously, unfortunately. I'm sure in all of your states that you live, there are different rules around when you can bill at a higher rate and have insurance reimburse you for it. But at least where I live, it doesn't benefit you in that way. However, if you have private pay clients, you certainly could charge more than other therapists because it is a specialty. And if you think about anyone you know who has had some sort of sex-related issue, they're usually quite motivated to get it fixed. And so you could charge a little bit more. If you're certified, it does not mean you get to give advice, just like we don't do in our general counseling work. It certainly doesn't mean that you know everything about sex, affectional orientation, gender identity. All of the time I see clients where I spend a lot of time researching after I've met with them, or, I ask for explanation or why is that important to you? This is an important point. I think enjoying sex, being open to talking about sex, your personal interest in certain things like kink or being a member of the LGBTQ community, all of those things does not make you a sex expert, which I say kind of jokingly, but there certainly are people out there who feel like, well, I'm in this community or I have this interest, so I am really skilled at it. No, that's not the case. It doesn't allow you to judge or offer personal opinions about sex. So we always follow our code of ethics, as we know, and we have to stick to them. Sorry about that thing on my screen. Okay, so what do we need to know if we're a sex therapist? But also please replace that with sex positive. We're going to kind of talk about the difference between actually having the certification and being sex positive. So I think all of you could be sex positive if you're not already. You need to know how to have a thorough sex history intake. We're going to talk about that on the next slide, I think. You need to have a clear understanding of affectional orientation. And I say affectional orientation, some of you might be like, what is that? Sexual orientation, but more commonly these days, we're talking about it as affectional orientation. Who do you have affection for? Who do you love? Who are you interested in? Everybody has a sexual orientation, but we seem to only refer to it when we're talking about queer clients. So it's kind of this shift to being more inclusive and talking about who do we like, who are we affectionate towards. You have to have an understanding of gender identity, some basic issues like polyamory, BDSM, what does it mean to be non-cisgender, monogamous, heterosexual norms. We kind of have to know what is typical and where might some of our clients sort of fall into play. This idea of sensate focused touch, which we're going to talk about, it's a really easy intervention that all of you could use. I think that sex and disability resources are really important. Sexual pain resources and referrals is something that I think probably no counselors are prepared for until they've had a client who has some sort of pelvic pain issue. You need to have a list of pelvic floor physical therapists in your area that you have maybe connected with, you've networked with, you feel really confident that they're going to help your clients, because all the therapy in the world will not help a medical issue. So we can help support and normalize and work through anxieties related to, but sometimes clients just have to go to physical therapy for a pelvic floor issue. So know people in your area that you can refer to. Know competent and sex-affirming gynecologists, urologists in your area. Again, we cannot fix medical issues. And so if someone comes to me and they're talking about pain or they're talking about an erectile issue, I always send them first to a medical appointment with a specialist that I do trust. And I did not have these resources when I started out. It's a list I've built over time. So don't panic if you don't know that now, but maybe start to look at what that is in your area. We have to have pictures, examples, sex toys. images. We want to normalize and we want to educate. So if you've never touched a sex toy in your life, that's okay, but like it's going to be hard to talk to your clients about it. So have all the things and be ready to talk to them. I think that's super important. Books, websites, we'll get to some of those resources, I think. Okay, so Sensate Focused Touch is an intervention that's been around for a really long time. It's very easy. You can look it up. There's lots of research articles about it. So this is not like Sarah's special intervention. You can find it anywhere. But it is really helpful for almost all clients that I see, queer or not, any sort of gender, any sort of relationship structure, it's helpful. So the focus is on self-enjoyment and pleasure rather than a particular emotional, physical, sexual response. So most clients come to me and they say, my sex life is awful. And then what are you going to do about it? And so their goal is usually like, we have to fix this. We have to have better sex. But this activity is actually like, let's not worry about the sexual response. Let's think about self-enjoyment. You focus on touching yourself rather than a partner. So again, when you think about a lot of couples that maybe you've seen in your clinical work, they are like, is my partner enjoying this? Am I doing a good job for my partner? Is this working? And Sensate Focused Touch is actually focused on, am I enjoying this? Do I feel relaxed? Is this fun for me? So that's a pretty big shift for a lot of clients. We have to manage distractions. So how many clients have you talked to who are like, I'm so stressed, I have 50 loads of laundry and there's no way I'm going to be enjoying sex? Those are some of the distractions that get in the way. So during this activity, they're thinking hopefully to manage some of those distractions. Intimacy in all of the ways, not just sexual or penetration. So does this touch feel nice? Does that feel too ticklish? Whatever. We're thinking about all that stuff. And sexual responses will arise naturally because that's how bodies work. And we focus on senses. So Sensate Focused Touch is senses. What do I hear, smell, taste, all those things? I'm going to tell you how to do it. It being Sensate Focused Touch. Okay, so if you're all following me, it's hard when I can't see you, but I'm assuming that you're riveted. So I'm going to keep going. When you have a couple, any partners involved, 2 partners or more, it doesn't matter, they agree to not have sex. The act of sex is not the goal. It's about pleasure, touch, being self-aware. And we set a time frame. So not to stereotype, but a lot of times if it's a heterosexual couple, usually the male is beyond pissed that you're not supposed to have sex. Okay, so you've set a time frame. So usually like a month is good, or maybe 2 weeks if they're really, really resistant to it. So we say, okay, we're not going to have sex for 2 weeks. Let's do that. Usually one partner is relieved, thank goodness, because sex has become this like big, intense thing, and they're glad to not have sex. The other person who feels like their sex life is terrible is now mad that you're not having it. So there's a lot of feelings. But when the partners decide they're going to practice their Sensate Focused Touch, they need to create a comfortable environment and mood and have enough time. So you need like at least 30 or 40 minutes where they're not going to be interrupted. Now think about all factors. Your dog can't be barking, your cat can't be jumping on the bed, whatever. So you might even have to help your clients figure out what is a comfortable mood. They need to be sober. A lot of sexual patterns can sometimes be caught up in substances. So what they do is they take turns, about 10 minutes per partner, laying down naked or as naked as they possibly feel comfortable. So again, if there's any sort of like trauma, insecurities, anything like that, the couple might adjust. So 10 minutes per partner, you set an alarm for 5 minutes. And let's say one partner is laying down, the other person would go head to toe on their back side for 5 minutes, thinking about all of the senses. What am I touching? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? All that stuff. The person laying down is also thinking about their senses. When 5 minutes is up, I always joke that it feels like a rotisserie chicken, whatever. They flip over. You do the other 5 minutes on the other side. Okay, if you're following, all that has happened is we've touched one partner in a very like clinical sense. Also, they're doing this at home and I'm not there, right? That's very clear. And they think about what's happening, they don't talk. And if there's something that's really uncomfortable, the one partner could like move the other person's hand out of the way, but we try not to talk. And then at the end of it, so 5 minutes on one side, 5 minutes on the other, partners switch 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And then they either talk about how it went for them or they journal about it. So you'll get a sense if the couple feels like they can talk about it well or they need to journal. And then they bring it to therapy and you talk about it. Very basic, I think. But let's think about, let me see what my next slide even is. Okay. The purpose. The purpose really is that they start to think about, what am I enjoying? What feels comfortable? I've had partners who say like, I never realized that you give me such a wimpy touch and it really turns me off. One couple I worked with said the one partner crawled across the bed in such a unflattering way to the other person that they hadn't realized that was such a turnoff, and they kind of got the ick, and they were like, oh no. So through this activity, when the focus wasn't like on sex, they were focused on how are we touching each other. They were so weirded out by the crawl across the bed that they fixed it. So, I mean, okay. So a lot of different things can happen. In the first stage of sensate focused touch, there is no sex. You cannot have sex. If one partner feels some sort of sexual release because they're being touched, that's okay. But like the goal is not sex. And after maybe they go through 2 weeks, sometimes I'll say, can you do it for 2 weeks more in practice? And then there is a stage where breasts can be touched, and then a final stage where genitals can be touched. And so it can become more and more sexual, and you continue to evaluate with the couple, like, is this feeling comfortable? Are you okay moving to the next step? Does it feel like pressure? And we continue to work through issues. So can you all, if anyone feels comfortable, can you shout out if you can think of how this might benefit clients who are going through any sort of sexual issue? Oh, I see the chat. Okay, communication, body awareness, paying attention. Yes, because I think all people get into like patterns and they don't realize. So when they pay attention, it's helpful. Also, the comment about homework. How many people's like sex life I'm involved in is like too much, but they always will say like, we have to do our Sarah homework, which is like, if you're entering people's sexual chat. Mind-body connection, exactly. Yes, all of those things. It can help build intimacy rebuild intimacy, yeah. And I think one thing that is so important is, yes, increasing intimacy. Okay, you all are exactly right, because sometimes sexual experiences become about the orgasm basically, and all the rest of the stuff is forgotten about. That is the sexual intimacy that a lot of people are missing. And so when you take away that end goal of sex, we can focus on all of the connection in between. I see it a lot of times helping break out of ruts, like, we put our kids to bed, we watch TV all night, we fall asleep. We've done that every night for the last 7 years, right? Like I've seen clients who've gone a really, really long time because they're not comfortable breaking out of their typical routine. But if they say, okay, twice this week, we're supposed to lay down and do this touch, it does automatically break them out of some of that pattern. I see it with survivors of sexual assault. They very much don't want certain parts of their body touched, and maybe they haven't reevaluated what those are exactly, or they haven't communicated them with their partner. Especially clients after childbirth, when bodies change and intimacy changes. So all of these things are very, very important. At the very end, I'm not sure if we'll have time to talk about this one case, but I had a client in the past who was a trans man who had never engaged in any sort of sex anything in all the definitions of sex because he was so afraid of becoming pregnant. And so we did sensate focused touch with his partner so that he could start to maybe just enjoy any kind of touch, and eventually worked towards the kind of sex life that he was hoping for. But it was like a whole area that he had never explored. Confidence issues for sure. So that's why I said that if they don't feel comfortable being all the way naked, you could say like, all right, well, leave your sweats on or whatever, your underwear, whatever feels the most comfortable. And then we work up towards it because the goal is, how do I feel comfortable? So I think it also helps set the stage, right? So like, do I really need a room that is clean? Right? Or like, do I need the dog to be put away so I can focus on you? You work on all the stages of intimacy through this activity. It's actually accomplishes a lot for a very small activity. Okay, so any questions on sensate focused touch? I mean, there's probably a lot, but you can look it up. You can use this intervention, whether you're a sex therapist or not. I just would probably recommend you read some articles about it. But this is the basics of how it works. Or if you don't want to call it sensate focused touch and say, this is what I'm doing, maybe you can use some of the ideas of like, how do you create a nice mood, or what would you enjoy in terms of touch if sex was taken off the table and it wasn't an option. Yes, I have used this with many. So the question is, have I used this with a triad? Yes. And so you would just add another round of like 5 more minutes, and you could ask everyone involved if they want to be touched individually or be touched with both of the other partners. There's ways that you can vary this for any sort of, any sort of clients that you see. So in the past, when I've done it, they wanted to be touched individually. So they were kind of responding to each partner and thinking about what was going on. So touching with objects, you can use as well. You might want to, just depending on what you're gaining from the people involved. If they're comfortable with it, go ahead and use it, because for example, soft touch or a feather or like harder touch might be something that they need to explore and figure out, am I interested in it? But if there's any sort of trauma with various objects, then we would obviously hold off on that. So you can vary this in lots of different ways. We're thinking about the senses and we're thinking about what we enjoy. Everything else you can kind of alter. Good questions. Yeah, we can come back to this for sure. A sex history intake, this is super simplified. You don't have to ask all of these questions. If you saw how I started this presentation, I am so bad at beginning things. And so I'm always just like, let's just get to it. I don't need to be doing the paperwork, but of course we have to do the paperwork. So I don't ask all of these things, but over time we have to get this sex history really clear. So what are the presenting problems, the details, when did it start? How does it vary? What are some trends? A lot of trends I see relate to stress, job stress, children, finances. You all know how that can impact a relationship or a sexual interest, medication, starting, ending, all those things. Have they tried any sort of strategies that have worked in the past? Are there feelings associated? Yes. Like usually somebody's very mad, somebody's bitter, someone's about to get divorced, like it's all kind of in there. What do they attribute the problem to? What sort of impact is it having on the people, the relationship, anyone else that's involved, other partners, attempts to remedy and how successful it was. Why are they coming to therapy now? So I just had someone reach out and say, like, we've been in a miserable relationship for 30 years. Now we're ready for therapy. So it's going to be like, a bit of a challenge probably. But I like that. So that's fine with me. But again, like if they had come to therapy 29 years ago, it might be different. What is their commitment to therapy? And then obviously we come up with some goals that they are interested in. What is it like right now, presently in the relationship? So every time I've met with someone, they say, our sex life is terrible. that's it. I'm about to divorce my partner or whatever, break up with them, move out, and sex is the problem. And we know as clinicians that it's always something else. So I evaluate what's going on socially. Like, do they hate each other? They never want to go out in public. One person stays home, the other person wants to go out. What does that look like? Are they emotionally connected? What kind of interactions do they have? What sort of commitment to working on things do they have in their present relationship? This happens over many sessions. I think it'd be too much to ask in an hour, but I mean, if that's how you roll, you can ask all the questions, but I don't do that. And usually I ask one question and that goes on for like 3 sessions. I'm sure you all know how that works. Here's some other things that we ask as part of the intake. So how did their relationship develop? What did they learn about relationships and sex in their family of origin, their childhood? If they learned that you don't have sex until marriage and marriage is the only way to be in a relationship, there are some significant, there can be some significant issues. I had a couple once that was having so many problems with sex, and the one partner was told that as a child, though I think they actually believed as an adult, that if they used the towel of their partner, that they would become pregnant. So some psychoeducation, some like, let's talk about how this works. But the childhood like thoughts and beliefs were so strong that as an adult, it was really strongly impacting them. Religious issues as well. Career issues. So like you hate your job, you're stressed all day, you work long hours, partners' schedules don't align to even have time together, all very important. Sex history, like these things like sex play as a child, body exploration and stimulation. When did you learn about sex? Like, even if you learned it from your parents openly, you read a book together, or you like secretly Googled it online and found porn, very different like experiences. So I always like to ask about that. Partner stimulation, their first intercourse experience, traumatic sexual events, current attitudes about sex, response patterns to sex, dating history, types of relationships they've been in. It would be a lot to ask, right? All at once. All these things we also ask about because often there is a pregnancy that was terminated or that they don't want to talk about. But if I ask them, they are willing to say that, or maybe a pregnancy loss that has been very emotional. So the main thing with these history questions is that if you don't ask it, most people are going to keep it to themselves, because in society, we have this belief that we're just not supposed to talk about this stuff. I've had many people be in therapy with me who said like, well, we've been in couples therapy for 5 years and we just never have gotten very far. And maybe the first session or two, I ask about their childhood sexual experiences and they like go totally white and say like, nobody's ever asked us that. And then that is like the core issue, right? Something that happened in their childhood. So if you're not willing to ask and feel comfortable asking, then you're not going to get the information you need. At the very least, we need to just ask couples that we're working with, what is your sex life like? Because so many people have said they've been in couples therapy, but their therapist never asked about sex, which I find just totally unbelievable, but maybe because I'm very comfortable talking about it. But how can we work on what's happening between partners if we've never asked about that? So I have a whole presentation about like stuff you didn't learn in your master's program about sex. And so some of us probably don't feel super comfortable, or you don't know that you don't think you've learned enough about this. But again, just asking like, tell me about the first time you had sex. Was it enjoyable or not? If you can feel comfortable enough asking that, I think it's a nice, gives you a lot of information. It's a nice opener to like what we can talk about sex. Do you feel comfortable personally, or I'm sorry, do you feel comfortable directly asking about incest, rape, first sexual experiences, masturbation, fantasies, turn on, sex play as a child? I think most clinicians probably struggle to say, like, has there been any situations of incest in your family? Most people probably struggle, but if you practice, it comes out much easier the fifth time than the first time, right? And can you answer these questions confidently of yourself? So that's important. We have to really do the work personally to feel like, we can answer them, or we know what sort of traumas have happened in our own life that we can then work with our clients. So this is an activity that when I have taught human sexuality in person at some schools that I make the students do, but can you write down and verbally say out loud slang words for penis, vagina, breast, anus, clitoris? So if you think about what are all the slang words for penis, this is getting recorded, so you don't have to write them down. You don't have to put them in the chat, but you know what they are, right? And so if our clients say, especially if we're working with younger people, they might come in and they're talking about all these slang words. And I can imagine many therapists turn bright red, right? They get super nervous, like, oh my gosh. You have to be willing to hear them, to say them, to know what those words are. So I make the students write the words all over the whiteboard. And ironically, it was at a Catholic university. So anyway, and then do you feel like you know what the words are? It often gives us a lot of learning moments like, oh gosh, I did not know people were saying that. It can be an interesting activity. Yes, a word cloud. See, it's scholarly. It's all good. Okay, so here are some resources that I think are helpful. Sex Positive Families is a really good blog, and also like they have an Instagram, but there's questions that apply generally for us as clinicians, but then also we can refer our clients to based on age. There's like things for children, things for adults about all of these issues that you see here. How to talk about porn, puberty, menstruation, all of these things. I use it a lot when I see people who are worried about their kids, or they're worried that their relationship structure, like let's say previous monogamous parents are taking on another partner. There's interesting information on sex positive families. I share it all the time. The Beautiful Cervix Project is a website where you can just see people's real cervix in photos, including post-abortion, IUDs, different ages. Oh, thanks. There's the links. Awesome. That is helpful because so many people have never seen images of body parts other than their own, or they've never even looked at their own. So if you can just say, like, this is super normal, this is what it looks like, you pull it up on your computer if you're doing virtual work or in person, it just normalizes. That's the point. The Labia Library is another website that just has all the images. The Ethical Slut is one of the most well-known books in sex therapy. It's been revised a bunch, but the information is the same. A lot of clients who are poly, they're interested in various types of kink, and they're trying to explore, like, what does this mean for me? They usually like to read The Ethical Slut. Come As You Are is by Emily Nagoski, who is a AASECT certified sex educator, and she just has a new version. It doesn't look exactly like that, but you see how it's a purse with a vagina on it. That's important. I like that. And then Sensate Focus in Sex Therapy is like a workbook, and Constance Avery Clark is one of the most well-known sex therapists. And then also Ethical Porn for Dicks and the Manual of Sex Therapy. So all of these are books that you could have in your library. You could have them on your bookshelf and your clients see them and they're like, oh, you're sex positive, or at the very least, you've read them, you can refer your clients to them. They're all really helpful. If you go to the AASECT book list, there's also all the books there are written by certified sex educators, counselors, or therapists. And so those would probably be the books I trust the most. AASECT stands for the American Association for Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And that is the organization to refer to. All right, moving along. I could talk about this all day, so we're going to move along. Okay, so AASECT is the organization of sex educators, counselors, and therapists. And they are the people who provide the official certifications. Now, there are people out there where you take like a 3-credit course and they call that some sort of certification. You want to be very careful that you don't get sucked into that. You want an AASECT certified program. They do have training programs that maybe happen over a couple of different summers, and they can be expensive, but they're good. You just want to really scout it out through AASECT. You do have to have your master's degree, but any sort of training that you do throughout your master's or before probably will count, because you can use them for a certain number of years. I think it's 5 years. And as clinicians, you would be looking at the sex therapist certification. Counselors and educators, though we are counselors, counselors and educators are more like the people who go into schools and they run sex ed sort of programs. But we would be therapists. You have to have a membership, you follow the code of ethics, and then I'm going to skip over some slides because I don't want your brain to spin. But if you go to AASECT, you can see all of these requirements. Like you do have to have sex education coursework, you do have to have specific subcategory trainings, then you actually apply. But let me tell you, you see there's ethics, you learn about development, intimacy, sexual expression, you learn about all these things, so much of it. But what you can do, I'm going to keep going, is that you will have a supervisor. If you want to get an official certification, you first find an AASECT certified sex supervisor, and they walk you through this. They say like these are the education hours you need. You should go to this conference. You can get all these hours. Right this week is the AASECT Spirit Week. It's a virtual part of their conference. So in between our conference here, I'm going to that. So you can get a lot of hours online as well. There are other approved training programs you can go to. So there's a lot of options and your supervisor can help you. So that's why I skipped over those slides because I don't want anyone stressing. But one thing that's really awesome is the sexuality attitude reassessment, where you go for, I think it's like 2 full days and you work with an AASECT educator and they really, really challenge you and your attitudes about sex. The one I went to, we watched a lot of porn, and we would watch it, and then everybody was kind of reflecting on, was this interesting to me? Did this make me uncomfortable? Could I talk to clients about it? And by the end of it, you were like, wow, that is so much porn we watched with colleagues. And but I suppose if I could do that, then I'll be just fine. So that's kind of the idea, but it's an interesting part of the certification process that I really liked. Yeah, you also will work with your supervisor throughout the whole process. You meet weekly or every couple of weeks, it kind of depends. It says no less than 18 months. I think it took me 2 years because I was in my doctoral program. So it's certainly a process. And the reason that I say that, then you apply, the SAR is what I just said. It's a process and it can cost a lot of money. So what I did myself was I had a supervisor, and then I would go to the conferences, which were super interesting anyway. And I tried to be strategic about, okay, if I need all these different areas of education, let me go to this session, this session, this session. And I went to like 2 annual conferences, and then everything else I could fill in online. And that was easy, more than enough hours. But you can also join official programs, like the University of Michigan has an amazing sex therapy program, but it's about $6,000. So it's like, if you have a job that's paying for it, go for it. But, at the time I was not doing that. but we always operate from the highest code of ethics. So there's quite a few things in the AASECT code of ethics that do vary a little bit. So the AASECT code has some areas that are stricter than Pennsylvania, where I live. For example, absolutely never any sort of relationship, friend, like you just don't do anything ever with a former client. You stick to the highest code of ethics, which you all probably know that. Yeah. So we don't want to misrepresent ourselves. So if you all are feeling like, no way am I spending $6,000, I fully support that. But you can go to all of the trainings. You can feel really comfortable and confident talking about these issues. You just don't say you're a sex therapist. You say, I'm sex positive. AASECT even will look at your website and make sure you don't say like AASECT training in process, because it makes it appear that you might have the certification. So we just don't do that. Someone said, can you add the training link? And if you go to the AASECT website, there's a whole entire huge part of the website that will help with that. And like I said, it gets really detailed, and I just don't want to overwhelm you, but it is something you first find a supervisor and then they help you through that process. Okay, that was a lot of stuff, and we're already at the case study. So I'm going to bring this one up, and I hope that you all will jump in and like maybe add some of your thoughts. But this client was a 25-year-old trans man in the first relationship of any kind, and it was with a male partner, cisgender male partner, and they had never experienced any sort of sexual touch. They rarely even physically touched the partners. Was extremely fearful of becoming pregnant due to reproductive organs, and did not want to identify at all with the LGBTQ community, which I think is an important bias that I had working with this client. I was kind of thinking, well, if I could connect him with other trans men, maybe he would feel more confident and comfortable. I'm thinking this mentally. And then like the next thing out of his mouth was, I hate being trans. I don't want to be a part of the LGBTQ community. And I was like, oh, okay, important. And a bit of a bias that I had. Had gender concerns, internalized homophobia and transphobia for sure. So think about, you're sex positive, you want to help this client, you're not going to refer him to a sex therapist, you can do it. What do you think you're going to start with? Any sort of thoughts? Sorry, I'm looking over here at the chat box is what I'm doing, but feel free to speak out loud too if you want. No, not in a support group, and would not go to a support group. Like I said, just did not want anything to do with being trans. Though I will say that like physically, well, had been on testosterone for quite a long time, was quite into the transition process physically and appearance wise and all those sorts of things, but just hated it so much. Yeah, childhood is a good place to start. When did he realize that he was a man? How did family respond to it? A lot of issues happened in college related to just like relationships and gender. We talked about that. Social history, religious backgrounds, yes. And also like think about just rural areas around you. Grew up in a very rural place where like he wouldn't even go back and see his family because it was so rural, which I understand. That's like where I grew up. So those were important pieces of the history. So yes, recommending an IUD for fear of pregnancy. Yes, we had to start with like the most basic psychoeducation though, about, even though he was very aware of how pregnancy could come about, was just so fearful. So we talked about types of touch that would maybe feel comfortable and appropriate. But yes, referring for medical support like an IUD, or like what would that look like, or you feel comfortable with, we can do that for sure. Also sensate focused touch. So I brought up this case then when we were talking about that. So with his partner, did the touch, realized, you know what, there is some touch that I like. I don't have to be scared of it all. It still was like very, very kind of basic touch, but felt more comfortable with it. The partner was just like so calm, would wait for years if he had to. So that was helpful because that's not always the case. And we worked through Sensate Focus Touch for honestly like 6 months. So I know I said 2 weeks, a month, something. We went through it for a really, really, really long time. So then they did figure out some sort of sexual touch that they both felt good about. Though then I shortly after stopped seeing this client. Not actually sure why, but we stopped seeing each other. But the Sensate Focus Touch was so important in just figuring out if there was any sort of touch that he felt comfortable with. Just like the most basic psychoeducation. So I thought that's why I included this. Because you might think like, oh, I have to be an expert in trans issues. I have to be an expert in what to do here. No, we had to talk about how you get pregnant. Pretty basic stuff. Right. And so there's a comment about suggesting types of sex because of maybe his disinterest in the LGBTQ community. I think one thing that's really important when we think about sex is this idea that like penetration is the only type of sex and orgasm is the goal. We have to like always say, what if we just had a really enjoyable experience and it was really fun for you? That could be the goal. That could be like the ultimate sexual experience, especially for people who have trauma and they're really worried about something. We're not working to give your partner an orgasm. We're working to just like enjoy it. So I want to just like establish that as something you can offer to your clients. But also there are just so many definitions of what is sexual touch. What do I call sex? What does my partner call sex? And so we never want to define that for people, but we can say like, would you ever have any sort of interest in this type of touch or this type of penetration? And then they get to obviously tell us what they're interested in. Or another strategy I use is to say like, why don't you go home? You think about it, maybe Google some sex toys if we're talking about certain types of penetration. And if you want to talk about it next time, you can. And almost always they come back and they want to report what they found. But if you offer it as such a like, well, why don't you see, no pressure, usually goes pretty well. So helping them understand what's out there. Sometimes I'll just like pull up different websites, different types of, sounds like I'm not talking about porn. I am talking about educational resources or maybe like looking through some sort of sex toy site with them. Like, have you ever even looked at these things? Do you even know what this is? Did you know how to find a lube that's going to work for you? Stuff like that is stuff that I pull up online since I am doing virtual therapy. Okay. I do think I have one. Okay, I'm going to just tell you this. I probably need to stop using this case because now everyone I know knows it, but that's okay. This couple gave me permission to, and so did the other person, to always use their story. But like I said, probably should stop using it. This couple identified as a lesbian couple. They were about 30. They hadn't had sex in so long, like 3 years. They were in significant financial debt. It was weighing on them. They were unhappy. They had aging animals. They had generalized anxiety. So there were all these sorts of areas that I talked about, right? They weren't doing social stuff. They were financially stressed. They were really stuck in a rut in terms of their routine. There was a lot of secrecy about their debt. So we worked on that. And we did Sensate Focus Touch. They participated. They would always report back, like, we did our Sensate Focus Touch, we went on a date, we're doing all this stuff, but they weren't ever improving. And I just kept thinking about like all the core reasons that people have trouble in their relationships. I did all the sex histories. We just weren't going anywhere. And I was starting to think like, maybe they're just not a super sexual couple. Maybe they'll never have sex again, but they wanted to. So I would let you all guess, and you'd guess like forever. You probably wouldn't guess it. The reason so their cat ended up dying, and shortly after, while they were sad and they worked through it, they ended up having sex, and they realized that their cat had been laying on their bed, slowly dying for like months and months and months and months, years, maybe, I don't know. And so it was like very sad, but also like, oh my gosh, like I never talked with them about making the environment super comfortable. And they had all these animals, including this cat that was like on their bed all of the time. And it was so unsexy, obviously, and sad for them that they just wanted to kind of like always snuggle and go to bed. And so like the amount of money that they paid me and it turns out their cat just needed to die was like, whew, I could not have prepared for that. But anyway, my point is that sometimes like the silliest, that's not silly, their cat died, but like it just was like the thing I was not asking questions about had such an impact on them. And so I suppose we could kind of end with the point that like we don't really know always what is impacting somebody's sex life, but if we're willing to work with them and talk about it, and they are committed to coming to therapy, eventually we'll get there. Eventually the cat will die, you know, so to speak, and we will figure it out. So anyway, interesting little topic there. Oh goodness. Okay. So there's some stuff in the chat for you to view. Does anyone have any questions in our last like few minutes together? Super few. It's okay that you don't, but you know, if you as a cat mom, yes, right, Aiden, you are right. It is very sad when people lose animals, but gosh, I just could never possibly understand that or ask the right questions. And so it did not come up on my sex history questionnaire, though, you know, now I will never forget that. So now I can ask about it. Yeah, does anyone have anything else? Just
Now
really
you'd be asking things like, are you still grieving the end of Game of Thrones? What's you'll be putting everything on your questionnaire.
just ask anything. Yeah. Right. I guess that's kind of like a question like, is there anything I haven't asked about that you feel like is important? Right. And like I said, I always like to jump in and do it and, you know, like, let's get to it. And I definitely missed that. Yeah, pets is a good. Go ahead, Chandra.
Dr. Dalton, hi, how are you?
Good.
I actually had a client, I'm doing private practice now and ended up with a client who was 20 years old and having issues with porn, and he was addicted to porn and to the point of where it was causing him medical issues with his private parts and him being able to have sperm production. And talking to him, and I understand what you're saying about feeling uncomfortable, because originally I got really uncomfortable with him and I started thinking like, is this really what's going on, or is he just calling, you know, just to, you know, just because he doesn't really have, you know, an addiction. He was like 20 years old and said that he had been doing this for like, he was like 22, 23, and said he had been doing this since he was like 16 years old. And I did end up referring him to a sex therapist and some sex groups that I found for him in the area. So this was really helpful for me in order to be able to become better educated and to be able to possibly help someone when they come to me. Because I had another person like that, and I you know, referred them to someone else because I didn't feel like I was going to be able to help them.
So this is the really quick version, but the organization AASECT strongly believes that you can't be addicted to sex because it is a human enjoyment and right and body issue. However, they call it problematic sexual behavior. So the sexual behavior has become so problematic that you're not going to work or your body is not functioning as it should. So on the AASECT website, there are a bunch of people who specialize in that piece of problematic sexual behavior. There's a lot to learn there. So if you maybe want to look some of that up, or we can talk the next time we see each other. It is not my personal area of specialty, though I do feel competent, but there are people who only all day long see people who are engaging in problematic sexual behavior. So it's interesting. Right, like food, like we have to eat food. You can avoid cocaine, right? Like differences. And there are certainly people who can avoid ever having sex, but in general, that's why they don't believe you can be addicted. Now, there are therapists out there that fully support addiction to sex, so I'm not trying to start some sort of debate, but they're just different viewpoints out there. Yeah, feel free to email me if you want. I know we're at our time, so thanks for coming.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.